Welcome back to Midnight Affair Tales. Thank you for joining us. Duke Callahan pulled into the driveway of his Texas home, the tires of his truck crunching over the gravel. A single porch light flickered against the darkness, casting long shadows over the familiar two-story house. His house. His sanctuary. His safe place after years of blood-soaked battlefields and bone-chilling nights spent in enemy territory. Except tonight, something felt off. He cut the engine and sat in silence, his instincts prickling at the base of his neck. It was the same feeling he'd had on deployments, right before an ambush. He'd learned to trust that feeling. It had saved his life more times than he could count. He exhaled, gripping the steering wheel. Maybe he was just tired. After all, it had been a hell of a long trip back home. 6 months gone. 6 months without Lila in his arms. Duke had been looking forward to this moment. Coming home, wrapping his arms around his wife, feeling normal again. But now, as he stared at the dimly lit windows, something deep in his gut twisted. Why wasn't she waiting for him? Lila always met him at the door. Always. Every time he came back from deployment, she'd be there, barefoot, in one of his old army t-shirts, her dark hair messy, arms wide open. She'd run into him, kiss him like she never wanted to let go. But tonight there was no sign of her. Duke stepped out of the truck, the cool night air biting against his skin. He closed the door quietly. The silence felt unnatural. No welcome home hug. No dinner waiting. Nothing. His boots hit the steps, slow and deliberate. He turned the doorknob. Unlocked. Another bad sign. Duke pushed the door open, stepping into the dimly lit hallway. The house smelled faintly of her vanilla candles, but something else mixed with it. A scent that didn't belong. Cologne. His jaw tightened. Lila didn't wear cologne. The floor creaked under his weight as he moved further inside. His eyes scanned the living room, perfectly clean, not a single thing out of place. But his military instincts were screaming at him now. Something was wrong. Then he heard it. The soft laugh. Muffled. Upstairs. A man's voice. Duke's entire body went still. His blood turned ice cold. For a moment the world stopped. Lila wasn't alone. 6 months away. 6 months of missing her. 6 months of believing she was waiting for him. And now another man was in their bedroom. Duke's hands clenched into fists, his heart hammering against his ribs. His breathing slowed. Years of training kicked in. He should have been angry. Furious. But instead, a dangerous calm settled over him. This wasn't just betrayal. This was war. What the hell was she thinking? Duke didn't storm up the stairs. He didn't shout. He didn't break down. Instead, he moved like a soldier in enemy territory. Silent. Calculated. Watching. He stepped out of the hallway's line of sight, positioning himself near the staircase. The voices grew clearer now. Lila's voice. Soft, playful. A man's voice. Deeper, cocky. Duke's fingers flexed, every nerve in his body coiled tight. He knew that voice. Travis Henshaw. A local real estate developer. Flashy. A guy who always acted like he owned the damn world. And he was in Duke's house. With Duke's wife. The bed creaked above him. Another low laugh. Sheets shifting. Duke's vision tunneled. It took everything in him not to go up there and tear the bastard apart. No, that would be too easy. Instead, Duke stepped back, reached for his phone, and turned on recording mode. He needed proof. Not just for himself, but for what was coming next. What if he comes home early? Lila's voice teasing. Travis chuckled. Babe, please. Your Boy Scout husband is probably halfway across the country, playing hero. Duke's grip tightened on his phone. Lila laughed. Like she wasn't just cheating, but mocking him. Travis kept talking. I don't know why you even bother with him. The guy's a relic. Military dudes like that? They come back broken. Soft. Lila sighed. I know, but he's got that life insurance, remember? Silence. Duke's heart stopped. Travis chuckled. Yeah. A nice fat payout. If something happens to him. Duke's blood ran ice cold. This wasn't just an affair. This was a setup. His wife wanted him dead. Duke didn't move for a long time. His own wife, the woman he had loved, protected, fought for, was planning to kill him. 6 months away, and she hadn't just cheated. She had turned him into a target. His mind ran through the facts. The insurance policy. The casual way they talked about his death. This wasn't just a betrayal. This was premeditated. Duke inhaled slowly. His rage wasn't like a wildfire, it was controlled. Precise. It ran through his veins like a slow-burning fuse, waiting for the right moment to detonate. His next move had to be smart. Revenge wouldn't just be about catching them in the act. It would be about making them pay. He backed away from the stairs, careful not to make a sound. He needed time. To plan. To prepare. To strike. Because war had just been declared. And Duke Callahan never lost a war. How do you destroy someone who already thinks they've won? Duke moved like a ghost through his own home. He had spent 2 decades in special forces, trained to track, to hunt, to eliminate threats before they even knew he was there. But this wasn't some mission in a foreign country. This was his own wife. His own bed. His own goddamn life. And he was the target. His breathing stayed even as he stepped back into the dark hallway, making sure not to let the wooden floor creak beneath his weight. Upstairs, Lila and Travis were still tangled in each other, laughing over his death like it was a business deal. She had planned it, calculated it. And that meant one thing: this wasn't her first time thinking about it. Duke's mind raced through every detail. Had she poisoned his food before? Had she stood in the kitchen, watching him take a sip of coffee, wondering if she had the nerve to slip something in? Had she ever imagined his funeral, smiling as she accepted the blood money? He clenched his jaw. He needed more than just the recording. Duke turned and moved to the kitchen. He knew where Lila kept the important documents. She was careful, too careful. If she had a life insurance policy on him, there would be more proof. His hands were steady as he reached for the top drawer near the fridge. Slowly he pulled it open. Bingo. A folder. Thick. Labeled with his name. Inside. Bank statements. Contracts. Insurance papers. And then a printed email. From albrooks_realty@gmail.com. To Denshaw_investments. Subject: policy approved. It's done. He signed without reading it. Once everything is finalized, we can start preparing for the accident. If anyone asks, I'll be devastated, but you know how clumsy he is. It won't take much. Just a little push. He'll never see it coming. Duke stared at the words. His stomach burned. He had signed his own death warrant. Lila had given him the papers months ago, buried under refinanced documents for the house. He had trusted her. Signed where she told him to sign. And now, she was cashing in. Duke folded the papers, sliding them into his jacket. His heartbeat never sped up. His hands never shook. He had been in worse situations. But this was personal. His wife thought she had planned the perfect crime. She had no idea she had just declared war on a man who never loses. Duke was in his truck before the sun even thought about rising. He wasn't thinking about grief. He wasn't thinking about heartbreak. He was thinking about strategy. Lila and Travis thought they had control. That's what made them careless. That's what would destroy them. He drove out of town, his tires kicking up dirt as he pulled onto an empty highway. The world was still quiet. Empty. Duke picked up his phone and dialed the only person he could trust. It rang twice. Then a groggy voice answered. Jesus, Duke, do you know what time it is? Duke didn't blink. I need a favor. Aside. Shit. That bad. Worse. Pause. Then, fully awake, I'll be there in an hour. Duke ended the call. He had just activated his backup. Nate Grayson. Former Army Ranger. Sniper. The only man Duke would trust to cover his six in a war zone. And now, Duke was bringing the war home. Nate arrived exactly 65 minutes later. They met in a back lot of an old truck stop, far from town, where no cameras could catch them. Nate stepped out of his blacked-out Jeep, dressed in a dark hoodie and cargo pants. He looked exactly like the kind of guy you didn't want to cross. Duke leaned against his truck, arms crossed. Nate eyed him. All right, Spill. Who needs to disappear? Duke exhaled slowly. Lila. Nate's brows shot up. Your wife. Duke tossed the folder onto the Jeep's hood. Not anymore. Nate flipped it open, reading fast. His face hardened. By the time he looked up, his expression had changed. This ain't just cheating, Nate said. His voice was quiet, deadly. She's trying to bury you 6 feet under. Duke nodded. That's why I need you. Nate shut the folder. All right. What's the plan? Duke pulled out his phone, swiping to a surveillance feed. Nate's eyes flickered. You got cameras on them? Duke's voice was cold. I don't go into a battlefield blind. He tapped the screen. A live feed from inside his own house showed Lila pacing in their bedroom. She was on the phone, talking to Travis. "I don't know, I just feel weird. What if he figures something out?" Travis laughed on the other end. "Relax, babe. By this time next week, it'll all be over." Nate glanced at Duke. "They really think you're just gonna roll over and die, huh?" Duke slid his phone into his pocket. His voice was calm. Too calm. "They think I don't see them." He met Nate's gaze. "I'm about to show them just how wrong they are." Nate smirked. "You got a timeline?" Duke nodded. 1 week. Nate let out a low whistle. "Damn. Quick work." Duke stepped forward, his voice colder than the night air. "They wanted an accident." His lips curled. "I'll give them one." Duke and Nate sat in the Jeep, parked in the shadows of an empty dirt road, the glow from Duke's phone casting sharp angles across his face. Nate whistled low. "So, your wife's got a plan to wipe you off the map and retire with pretty boy over there." Duke's jaw flexed. "That's what she thinks." Nate exhaled, shaking his head. "You want me to end this clean? A long-range solution?" Duke didn't blink. "No. Clean is mercy." Nate grinned. "That's the Duke I remember." Duke tapped his screen. On the live feed, Lila was now in the bathroom, fixing her makeup, her phone still pressed to her ear. Travis's voice crackled through the speaker. "We need to be smart about this. Your husband's ex-military. If we're sloppy, this goes south." Lila sighed dramatically. "He's not as sharp as he used to be. He trusts me. That's his weakness." Duke's fingers tightened into a fist. Weakness. She had no idea who the hell she was dealing with. Nate tapped the screen. "So what's the play?" Duke's eyes burned cold. "I turned the tables." Nate nodded. "How?" Duke leaned forward, his voice low, deliberate. "They think they're hunting me. But by the time I'm done, they'll be running for their lives." The next morning, Duke started the first phase of his plan. He let them see what he wanted them to see. He showed up at the house, acting exactly how Lila expected, a tired, clueless husband. He kissed her on the cheek, set his duffel bag down, and told her he was just glad to be home. She smiled sweetly, but Duke saw the hesitation in her eyes. She wasn't sure if he suspected anything. That was good. Doubt would make her reckless. Lila played her role perfectly. She fixed him coffee, touched his arm when she talked, laughed at his jokes. But her phone was never far. Duke sat at the kitchen table, drinking his coffee, pretending not to notice how often she glanced at the screen. She was texting him. "Travis." Duke's phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Nate. "She's nervous. Overcompensating." Duke smirked. He typed back, "Good. Give her a reason to be." Phase 2 began that afternoon. Duke started setting traps. Small things. A gun missing from his safe. A tracker on Lila's car. A burner phone left in his truck's console, deliberately placed where she could find it. That night, he watched her find it. She stared at the burner phone for a long time, her fingers gripping the edge of the counter. She glanced over her shoulder, then quickly tucked it into her purse. Duke didn't say a word. She thought she was ahead of him. She had no idea she had just taken the bait. By the next day, Lila was on edge. Duke could see it in the way she moved. Her hands were twitchier. She forced her smiles. She was waiting for something to go wrong. That's when Duke turned up the pressure. First, he let Travis feel it. At exactly 10:32 a.m., Travis received a message from an unknown number. "I know what you did." No signature. No details. Just enough to plant fear in his chest. At 3 p.m., Travis got a second message. "She's playing you too." Travis would panic. That's what cowards do. Then Duke focused on Lila. He started leaving small, unsettling clues, not enough to be obvious but just enough to mess with her mind. A single bullet left on the bedside table. The insurance papers moved slightly out of place. The hallway camera repositioned. Lila's nerves were fraying. Duke saw it in the way she jumped at small noises, the way she checked her phone constantly. Then he played his next card. That night, while Lila was in the shower, Duke stood outside the bathroom door. He spoke just loud enough for her to hear over the running water. "I've been thinking a lot lately, babe." Silence. Then the water shut off abruptly. Duke smiled. "Sometimes you think you know someone, but you never really do." He walked away. Lila didn't come out of the bathroom for a long time. By the time she did, her face was pale. Duke wasn't the only one playing games anymore. She was starting to realize it. But was it too late? Lila barely slept that night. Duke knew because he listened. She tossed and turned, breathing unevenly. Once, she got up to check her phone, pacing the bedroom before slipping back under the covers. She was unraveling. Duke lay beside her, his breathing steady, his body still as if he were deep in sleep. But his mind was fully alert. Watching. Calculating. By morning Lila was different. The usual ease in her movements was gone. She was trying too hard, smiling too much, talking too much, forcing affection. Over breakfast she slid a hand over Duke's. "I was thinking we should take a weekend trip soon," she said. "Just us." Duke raised an eyebrow. "That's so." She nodded, her grip tightening. "I miss us, babe." It was a lie. He could feel it in the way her fingers trembled slightly. She wasn't trying to fix their marriage. She was trying to control him. Duke let her believe it was working. "Yeah," he said, forcing a smile. "That sounds nice." Lila exhaled, relief flashing across her face. She thought she was back in control. She had no idea the walls were already closing in. By noon, Lila met Travis in the parking lot behind a coffee shop. Duke watched from his truck, parked half a block away. They weren't as careful as they thought. Their movements were tense, rushed. Lila kept glancing over her shoulder. Travis's hands were gesturing wildly, his face tight with frustration. Duke didn't need to hear the conversation to know what was happening. Travis was cracking. Duke had set the perfect trap, just enough doubt to make Travis question everything. The anonymous messages. The shifting evidence. The small, calculated changes Lila had no control over. Travis would start wondering if she was playing him. And Lila? She was already doubting Travis. By the time the conversation ended, Lila stormed away, shoving her phone into her bag. Travis stood frozen for a second before cursing under his breath and slamming his car door. Duke smirked. They weren't partners anymore. They were two people desperate to save themselves. Exactly where he wanted them. That night, Duke added fuel to the fire. At 2 a.m., Lila's phone buzzed on the nightstand. She didn't wake up. But Duke did. Carefully, he reached over and picked it up, his pulse steady as he typed a message to Travis from her phone. "We need to meet. I don't trust you anymore." Then he deleted the message from the sent folder, placed the phone back, and closed his eyes. The next morning, Travis took the bait. Duke watched as his phone lit up with a new message from his burner number. "Lila's meeting me tonight. If she tries to flip, she won't leave alive." Duke's jaw flexed. Travis was turning on her. The betrayal they had planned for him was now happening between them. The game was almost over. Now it was time for the final move. Travis sat in his car, gripping the steering wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. Lila was turning on him. He knew it. He felt it in his gut. The messages, the way she had started pulling away, the paranoia in her voice, it was only a matter of time before she cut her losses and flipped everything on him. He couldn't let that happen. He picked up his phone, staring at the message she had sent him in the middle of the night. "We need to meet. I don't trust you anymore." Travis cursed under his breath. She was about to screw him over. His first instinct was to go to her house, demand answers, force her to see reason. But then he hesitated. What if this was a setup? What if someone else was pulling the strings? Travis had spent years manipulating people, using them for what he wanted. He knew when a game was being played, and right now he wasn't the one holding the cards. His pulse pounded as he glanced at his glove compartment. Inside, tucked under a stack of documents, was his 9mm pistol. Just in case. If Lila was planning to betray him, he'd have to take care of it first. Lila was unraveling. She barely ate. She barely slept. Every sound in the house made her jump. Duke watched it all from the corner of his eye, never letting his expression slip. He pretended to be the same trusting husband she thought she had fooled. He kissed her on the forehead before work, texted her during the day, played the part of the man who didn't suspect a thing. But he saw the way her hands trembled when she poured coffee. The way her fingers hovered over her phone, hesitant before she answered. She was scared. Duke had given her every reason to be. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the horizon, Lila made a call. Duke sat in his truck outside the house, the audio streaming through his phone from the small bug he had planted under the kitchen table. Lila's voice was sharp. "You're acting weird, Travis. I don't like it." Travis's voice came through tense. "I'm acting weird? You're the one pulling back." What are you planning? Pause. Then Lila whispered, we need to talk. But not on the phone. Travis exhaled. Fine. Tonight. My place. Duke smiled coldly. Everything was falling apart between them. Now it was time to push it over the edge. Travis's apartment was on the 4th floor of a high-end building downtown. He thought he was safe. He had no idea Duke was already inside. Moving with the kind of precision that came from years in the field, Duke had picked the lock, disabled the security cam in the hallway, and slipped into the darkened space before Travis even arrived. He was waiting in the shadows when Travis stormed in, pacing near the window. Minutes later, Lila entered. Duke stayed hidden, crouched in the corner of the room, listening. Lila crossed her arms. What the hell is going on with you? Travis shook his head. No, you tell me. You think I don't know? You're setting me up, Lila? She scoffed. Are you serious? You're the one getting paranoid. I don't trust you, Travis. I think you're losing it. Travis's eyes flashed with something dark. You're playing me, he said. Just like you played your husband. Lila took a small step back. What are you talking about? Travis pulled out his gun. Lila froze. Duke remained perfectly still, his muscles coiled tight, waiting. Travis's voice dropped to a whisper. You think I don't know what you're doing? You got me into this mess. And now you're looking for a way out. Lila swallowed hard. Travis put the gun down. You didn't? Duke watched her face, watched her process the situation. For the first time, she wasn't the one in control. She was terrified. Good. Travis stepped forward, pressing the barrel to Lila's ribs. Tell me why I shouldn't end this right now. Lila's breath hitched. And that's when Duke stepped out of the shadows. Duke stepped out of the darkness like a phantom. Travis's hand tightened on the gun, but Duke's voice cut through the tension before he could react. If you're gonna pull the trigger, Duke said, his voice low and sharp, you better not hesitate. Travis froze. Lila's eyes widened, her breath shallow as she took a slow step back. Duke stood still, calm as ever, his gaze locked onto the man who had been sleeping with his wife and plotting his death. No emotion. No fear. Just control. Travis swallowed hard. You, his voice shook. You're supposed to be. Duke smirked. Dead? A beat of silence. Travis's fingers twitched against the gun's grip. He was scared. Good. Duke tilted his head slightly, his tone dropping to something lethal. Go ahead. Pull the trigger. Travis hesitated. His grip faltered. A mistake. Duke moved. Fast. Before Travis could react, Duke lunged, grabbing his wrist and twisting it in a brutal motion. The gun clattered to the floor. In the same second, Duke drove his elbow into Travis's ribs, knocking the air from his lungs. Travis stumbled back, gasping. Lila shrieked, pressing herself against the wall. Duke took a slow step forward, towering over Travis as he struggled to breathe. You thought you could kill me? Duke's voice was ice. You thought I wouldn't find out? Travis coughed, spitting blood onto the floor. His eyes darted toward the gun. Duke saw it before he even moved. Before Travis could dive for the weapon, Duke's boot slammed down on his hand. A sickening crunch. Travis screamed. Duke didn't move his foot. He leaned down, his voice a whisper of steel. You should have run when you had the chance. Travis wasn't done fighting. With his free hand he swung wildly, catching Duke's jaw. A mistake. Duke barely flinched. Travis gasped, still pinned beneath Duke's boot, his broken fingers twitching uselessly against the floor. Duke leaned down, pressing more weight onto Travis's crushed hand, drawing out another strangled scream. Behind him, Lila was trembling. Duke turned his head slightly, catching her in his peripheral vision. She wasn't scared for Travis. She was scared for herself. She should be. Duke lifted his boot, letting Travis curl into himself, cradling his shattered hand. He turned to Lila, his voice eerily calm. Tell me, sweetheart. He tilted his head. Did you think you could just erase me? Lila's breath hitched. Her lips parted, but no sound came out. Duke took a slow step forward, forcing her back against the wall. You looked me in the eyes every night, he murmured. Said you loved me. Slept beside me. Smiled at me. And the whole time. His voice dropped to a whisper. You were counting down the days until I was gone. Lila shook her head rapidly. Duke, don't lie to me. His voice was sharp, cutting through the air like a blade. Lila flinched. For the first time in her life she had lost control. Duke stared into her wide, tear-filled eyes. She wasn't crying because she felt guilty. She was crying because she knew she was out of options. Good. Duke exhaled slowly. You wanted me dead. Lila's lip quivered. Say it. She swallowed hard, her back pressed against the cold wall. She didn't answer. Duke turned his head slightly, eyes flicking to Travis, who was still groaning in pain on the floor. You see that? Duke gestured toward the broken man at his feet. That's what happens when someone underestimates me. Lila paled. Duke stepped closer, his voice dropping to something low and final. You wanted war, sweetheart. He tilted his head. You got one. The room was suffocating with silence. Lila's breaths were shaky, her chest rising and falling in rapid rhythm. Travis still clutched his broken hand, groaning against the hardwood floor, but Duke didn't care about him anymore. He wasn't the real enemy. His eyes stayed on Lila. The woman who had promised to love him. The woman who had kissed him, held him, pretended to care, while secretly plotting to put him in the ground. She trembled under his gaze, her hands shaking. She knew there was no way out. Duke spoke softly. Too softly. How long? Lila's lips parted. What? His expression didn't change. How long were you planning it? Lila opened her mouth, but hesitated. Duke stepped forward. She flinched. Tell me the truth. Lila exhaled sharply, tears welling in her eyes. Months, she whispered. Duke felt his stomach turn, but his face remained unreadable. How? Her breath shuddered. The plan was an accident. Her voice cracked. A home invasion. A robbery gone wrong. Duke clenched his jaw. He had been right all along. Lila never loved him. She had wanted the money. Wanted to erase him and build a new life with Travis. And now, she was standing in front of the man she had tried to kill, realizing he wasn't the one who was going to die tonight. Duke inhaled slowly, his pulse steady. I'm going to give you a choice. Lila's lip trembled. What? Duke's voice was ice. You can either confess, turn yourself in, face prison. His eyes darkened. Or, he leaned in close, his voice like a razor's edge. You can run. Lila blinked, confused. Run? Duke nodded. You run. And you never stop. Because if I ever see your face again. He let the words hang in the air, thick with promise. Lila swallowed hard. She understood. This wasn't a mercy. This was a death sentence, delayed. Duke stepped back, watching as realization sank into her bones. Lila's breath hitched, her entire body trembling. Travis let out a strangled cough, still trying to lift himself off the floor. Duke looked down at him. He wasn't going to kill them. Not yet. Because some deaths were too quick. Duke preferred the kind that lasted a lifetime. Lila wiped her tear-streaked face, taking slow, stumbling steps toward the door. She didn't look back. She knew better. Duke stood still, watching as his wife disappeared into the night, knowing she would never stop looking over her shoulder. War had been declared. And Duke Callahan had already won. Pause right here, amazing listeners. Did you know? Only 10% of people who enjoy these stories actually subscribe. I pour my heart into bringing you incredible stories every single day, and this month I have a big goal, 2,000 subscribers. So, if you love these stories, smash that subscribe button right now and be part of this journey. Also, tell me in the comments, where are you watching from? I'd love to know. Alright, let's dive back into the story. Duke stood in the doorway of Travis's apartment, his body loose, relaxed, but his eyes stayed sharp. Lila had disappeared into the night. Travis, on the other hand, wasn't going anywhere. The man was still curled up on the floor, clutching his shattered hand to his chest. His breathing was ragged, his face twisted in agony. Duke exhaled slowly, stepping forward. Boots against hardwood. Deliberate. Controlled. Travis tensed. What now? His voice was hoarse, filled with pain. Duke crouched down, watching him. Cold. Unforgiving. I could end you right here, Duke said simply. And no one would ask questions. Travis's throat bobbed as he swallowed. He knew it was true. Duke tilted his head. But that'd be too easy, wouldn't it? Travis blinked rapidly, his breath coming faster. Duke smiled. But there was nothing friendly about it. You're gonna live, Travis, he said softly. You're gonna get patched up and you're gonna keep running just like Lila. Travis's nostrils flared. You think I'm scared of you? Duke chuckled. Oh, dangerous. Oh, I don't think, son. I know. He reached into his pocket, pulling out a small USB drive. He dangled it between his fingers. This, Duke said, contains every conversation, every dirty deal, and every financial record that ties you to fraud, theft, and conspiracy to commit murder. Travis's lips parted. Duke leaned in, voice dropping to a whisper. You belong to me now. Travis's face drained of color. Duke stood up, towering over him. Wherever you go, I'll be watching. You even think about trying something stupid? He tossed the USB onto the floor next to Travis's broken hand. Consider this your leash. Travis sucked in a shaky breath. You. Duke cut him off. This was never your game, son. His voice was steel. You were just a pawn. With that, Duke turned on his heel and walked out. Travis was left behind, bleeding, broken, and knowing that from this moment forward, he was a man with no future. Duke drove in silence. The city lights blurred past him, the weight of the night finally settling in. He had done what he came to do. Lila was gone. Travis was destroyed. And yet, something inside him still burned. He didn't feel relief. Didn't feel satisfaction. Just emptiness. 20 years of war, and he had always thought the hardest battles were fought overseas. But now, he realized his worst enemy had been the person sleeping beside him all along. Duke pulled into a parking lot off the highway, gripping the steering wheel. He exhaled sharply, shaking his head. It didn't matter. It was over. He leaned back in his seat, staring out at the dark sky. At least that's what he told himself. Because deep down he knew, men like him didn't get endings. They just kept moving. Kept surviving. Kept becoming ghosts. The next morning, Duke walked into a quiet diner off the highway. He slid into a booth at the back, ordered black coffee, and waited. It didn't take long. The seat across from him shifted as Nate Grayson dropped into the booth. The former Army Ranger leaned back, stretching out his legs. His sharp blue eyes scanned Duke's face before he exhaled slowly. You look like hell. Duke smirked, lifting his coffee. Feel like it too. Nate flagged down a waitress, ordered bacon and eggs, then crossed his arms. So, Nate said, it's done? Duke sipped his coffee. Mostly. Nate arched a brow. Mostly? Duke leaned forward, voice quiet. Lila's still out there. Nate sighed. You let her walk. Duke's jaw flexed. Not exactly. Nate studied him for a moment. Then he chuckled. Man, you really don't believe in loose ends, do you? Duke didn't answer. Because he knew the truth. Lila Brooks was still breathing. And sooner or later, she'd be stupid enough to come back. When she did, Duke Callahan would be waiting. Lila was running, but she wasn't disappearing. Duke knew that much. A woman like her? Too vain. Too entitled. Too used to getting what she wanted. She didn't have the survival instincts to vanish. Not like a real ghost. And that's what was going to get her caught. Duke sat in his truck, watching the rain streak across the windshield as he scrolled through his burner phone. Nate had been busy. A fresh report came in. Lila Brooks spotted withdrawing cash at a bank in Phoenix, Arizona. Duke smirked. Idiot. She wasn't smart enough to drain her accounts all at once. She was taking it in pieces, trying to be careful, but not careful enough. She was scared. Duke pulled up another file. Her spending trail. A hotel booking under a fake name. A car rental in Nevada. A train ticket to California. She was running in circles, not realizing she was leaving breadcrumbs the whole way. Duke sipped his coffee, his fingers drumming against the wheel. He could go after her now. But where was the fun in that? Lila had spent months playing games behind his back. Now it was his turn. Duke leaned back, exhaling slowly. She had no idea that she was already caught. Lila's hands trembled as she pushed the cash across the counter. The teller at the rundown motel barely glanced at her fake ID before sliding a key across the desk. Room 14. No noise complaints. Lila snatched the key and hurried outside, the dry Arizona heat pressing against her skin. She scanned the parking lot twice before moving toward her rental car. Her nerves were shot. She had thought running would feel freeing, like shedding her old life and slipping into a new one. Instead, every step felt like someone was watching. Because someone was. Lila just didn't know it yet. She yanked open the motel room door, stepping inside and locking it behind her. The room smelled like mildew and bad decisions, but she didn't care. She collapsed onto the bed, staring at the ceiling. She had lost everything. The money in her bag was all she had left. No credit cards. No contacts. No backup plan. And worst of all, she had no idea where Duke was. That was the part that kept her awake at night. Not knowing. Not knowing when he'd find her. When he'd show up. If he'd make it fast or slow. She had seen that look in his eyes. He had let her run. But that didn't mean she was free. Lila squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to breathe. She needed a plan. Fast. Her phone buzzed. She flinched. Slowly, she reached for it, her fingers shaking as she stared at the unknown number flashing on the screen. She hesitated. Then, her breath hitched as a message appeared. "You didn't think I'd let you go that easy, did you?" Lila's blood ran ice cold. He had found her. Duke sat outside the motel, the glow of his cigarette barely visible in the shadows. He watched the single light flicker in room 14. Lila was inside. Alone. Panicking. Good. He had given her a taste of what it felt like to live in fear. To wonder if every shadow was him. Now, it was time to bring the nightmare closer. Duke reached for his phone and sent another message. "You don't get to walk away, sweetheart. You chose this. Now you live with it." Inside the room, he saw the curtain shift slightly. Lila was looking for him. Duke smiled. She wouldn't see him. Not yet. This was just the beginning. Lila had made a mistake when she tried to bury him. Now, Duke Callahan was about to bury her. Lila's breath came in short, panicked bursts as she pressed her back against the motel room door. She reread the message on her phone, her fingers trembling. "You don't get to walk away, sweetheart. You chose this. Now you live with it." She swallowed hard, her heart pounding so violently it hurt. Duke had found her. Her worst fear, the one she had been running from for weeks, had finally caught up. She rushed to the window, pressing her fingers against the edge of the curtain and pulling it aside just enough to see outside. Nothing. The parking lot was quiet. The neon motel sign buzzed softly, flickering against the dark. A few cars sat in the lot, but none she recognized. But that didn't mean he wasn't out there. Duke wouldn't be stupid enough to let her see him. No, he was too smart for that. She squeezed her eyes shut, forcing herself to think. She needed a way out. Grabbing her bag, she dumped the contents onto the bed. Gosh. A burner phone. A switchblade. Not enough. She needed more. A new identity. A car he couldn't track. A place he wouldn't think to look. She was halfway to stuffing the money back into her bag when her phone buzzed again. "You checking the window? That won't help you. I see you." A sharp gasp left her lips. She spun, pressing her back against the wall. Her eyes darted to every corner of the room. No cameras. No open vents. No way he could see her. But he did. Duke was here. Or worse, he had been here before she even arrived. A low whimper left her throat. She had walked right into his trap. Duke took another slow drag from his cigarette, watching the way Lila's shadow moved frantically behind the motel curtains. She was panicking. Good. He wanted her to feel it. Not just fear. Desperation. Hopelessness. The same things he had felt when he realized the woman he loved had been planning his death. He flicked the cigarette onto the gravel and crushed it under his boot. Then he dialed a number. The call rang twice before someone answered. "You in position?" Duke asked. On the other end, Nate's voice was calm. "Yeah. South exit is covered. She tries to run, I'll see it." Duke nodded to himself. He had covered every escape route. Lila thought she still had options. She didn't. "Hold position," Duke ordered. "I'm going in." He ended the call and slipped his gun into the back of his waistband. Not that he'd need it. Lila wasn't a fighter. She was a manipulator. But tonight? Her mind games were over. Duke took slow, measured steps toward room 14, stopping just outside the door. From inside he could hear her erratic breathing. He knocked once. Silence. Another knock. Then in a low voice, one that carried through the cheap motel walls, he spoke. "Open the door, Lila." Inside he heard the sudden shuffle of movement. A sharp intake of breath. She was cornered. Nowhere to run. Duke smirked. Checkmate. Lila stood frozen in the middle of the motel room, staring at the door like it might explode open at any second. Duke was right there. His voice had sent ice through her veins, too calm, too certain. He wasn't here to talk. He was here to end this. Her eyes darted to the nightstand. The knife. She lunged for it, gripping the cold steel handle and tucking it behind her back. Another knock. Don't make me ask again. Lila's throat was so dry she couldn't even swallow. Her mind raced. If she ran for the window, he'd catch her before she got it open. If she tried the door, he was already there. Her only choice? Buy time. She took a deep breath and forced her voice to stay steady. Duke, she called out. Please, we can talk. Silence. Then, the doorknob twisted. Lila's stomach dropped. She had locked it. She was sure she had locked it. But a second later, the lock popped and the door creaked open. Duke Callahan stepped inside. And for the first time since she had met him, Lila felt what it was like to be truly, helplessly afraid. Lila's breath was stuck in her throat as Duke stepped inside the motel room. The door swung shut behind him, the heavy click of the lock sealing her fate. He didn't move fast. He didn't have to. His steps were slow, deliberate, his eyes cold and unreadable. She tightened her grip on the knife hidden behind her back, her fingers slick with sweat. This was her only chance. She licked her lips, forcing a small, shaky smile. Duke, I swear I never wanted this. He let out a quiet chuckle, shaking his head. Lila's stomach dropped. That's funny, Duke murmured. Because I remember listening to you plan my funeral. She swallowed hard. It wasn't like that. Shut up. His voice was calm, but the force behind it made her flinch. Duke took another step forward. She backed up, her heels hitting the edge of the cheap motel bed. Nowhere left to go. You always knew how to spin a story, didn't you? Duke's voice was quiet, almost thoughtful. Always so damn good at making people believe what you wanted them to. Lila forced herself to stay composed. Duke was smart, but he was still a man. And men had weaknesses. She just had to find his. She dropped her gaze, letting fake tears build. Duke, I was scared. Travis, he manipulated me. I didn't know what to do. She sniffed, her voice breaking just enough. I regretted everything. Duke's expression didn't change. Regret, he repeated like he was tasting the word. Then, before she could react, his hand snapped out, grabbing her wrist. She gasped, eyes going wide as he yanked her forward, forcing the knife out of her grip. The blade clattered to the floor. Her pulse exploded in panic. Duke shook his head slowly, like he had expected it. Nice try, he said. Lila's breath hitched. For the first time, she knew she wasn't going to talk her way out of this. Duke tossed the knife onto the bed and tightened his grip on Lila's wrist. She tried to yank away, but his hold was like iron. She had never been afraid of him before. Even when she was plotting against him, even when she had been lying to his face, he had always been predictable. Not anymore. This wasn't the same man she had betrayed. This was someone else entirely. Please, she whispered. Duke didn't blink. You should have thought about begging before you tried to kill me. Lila's breathing hitched. Duke pulled her forward, forcing her to sit on the bed. He leaned down, pressing his hands onto the mattress on either side of her, caging her in. You think you're the victim here? His voice was quiet. Dangerous. She shook her head rapidly. No. You cheated on me. His tone never wavered. Plotted against me. Signed my death certificate like it was a business deal. Her bottom lip trembled. Duke's voice darkened. Tell me, Lila, when did you decide I wasn't worth keeping alive? She let out a choked sound. Duke, I said tell me. His sudden voice explosion made her jump. Tears spilled down her cheeks. I didn't. Duke pulled back slightly, exhaling slowly, reining himself in. He wasn't going to kill her. Not yet. Because Lila didn't deserve a quick death. She deserved to feel everything he had felt. Betrayal. Fear. The slow, crushing realization that there was no way out. Duke let go of her wrist. Lila's breathing shuddered. She knew. She was at his mercy. And Duke Callahan had no mercy left to give. Duke stood up, rolling his shoulders. Lila stayed frozen on the bed, not daring to move. He glanced down at her, tilting his head. I should put a bullet in you right now. Her body jerked in fear. Duke let the words settle. Then he shook his head. But that's too easy. She blinked rapidly, her whole body trembling. What do you want from me? Duke smirked. Want from you. He let out a cold chuckle. You still think you matter, don't you? Lila's breath hitched. Duke crossed his arms. I already won, sweetheart. You lost the second you thought you could beat me. She sucked in a sharp breath. He leaned forward slightly, his voice turning into something darker. Something final. So here's what's gonna happen. Lila swallowed hard. You're gonna disappear. For real this time. Duke's voice was steel. You take your money, you run, and you never come back. Lila's hands clenched into fists. And if I don't? Duke's smile disappeared. You'll wish I had killed you tonight. Silence. Lila's throat bobbed. She knew him. Knew he wasn't bluffing. Duke took a slow step back, eyes locked onto her. Pack your things. You have 5 minutes. Lila hesitated. Duke didn't. He reached for the gun tucked into his waistband and clicked off the safety. Lila scrambled off the bed, nearly tripping over herself. She grabbed her bag, stuffing money and clothes inside with shaking hands. Duke watched, arms crossed. Unmoved. Unaffected. She zipped the bag, hesitating near the door. Duke lifted the gun slightly. Lila's lips parted, but she didn't finish the sentence. She turned, yanked open the door and ran. Duke listened to her footsteps fade into the night. Then finally he let out a slow breath. It was done. He had let her go. But Lila Brooks would spend the rest of her life looking over her shoulder. Because some ghosts don't haunt houses. They haunt people. And Duke Callahan would always be in the shadows. Duke stood in the doorway of the motel room, staring at the empty parking lot where Lila had vanished into the night. The world outside was quiet. No sirens. No footsteps. No lingering traces of her existence. Just silence. He took a slow breath, feeling the weight of everything settle deep in his bones. It was over. Not just this night. All of it. The betrayal. The mind games. The war that had been playing out behind his back for months. And yet, something inside him felt unfinished. Not regret. Not second thoughts. Just a hollow kind of stillness. Duke stepped back into the room, closing the door behind him. The dim light flickered overhead, casting shadows against the stained motel walls. His gaze flicked to the bed. The knife still lay there, glinting under the cheap lamp. The last move she tried to make against him. He picked it up slowly, running a thumb over the blade. It didn't matter now. Lila Brooks was gone. And Duke Callahan was still here. But for the first time in his life, he wasn't sure what came next. Duke didn't go home that night. Home wasn't home anymore. Instead he drove. Miles of empty road stretched ahead of him, the glow of his headlights cutting through the darkness. His phone buzzed on the seat next to him. Nate. Duke picked it up, pressing it to his ear. You done? Nate's voice was calm, steady. Duke exhaled. Yeah. Pause. You sure? Duke didn't answer right away. Sure? That was a funny word. He had spent his entire life being sure. Sure of his orders. Sure of his targets. Sure of his enemies. But now there was nothing left to fight. I let her go, Duke finally said. Another pause. Then Nate sighed. That woman deserved worse. Duke's grip tightened on the wheel. I know. Silence stretched between them. Then Nate spoke again. So what now? Duke stared at the road ahead, his jaw tight. That was the question, wasn't it? What the hell was he supposed to do now? Duke pulled off the highway just as the sun started creeping over the horizon. The small diner was quiet, just a few early risers scattered in booths, nursing cups of coffee. Duke slid into a corner booth, resting his forearms on the table. His body felt heavy. He had spent years at war. Had seen men die in worse ways than he cared to remember. Had watched friends become ghosts before their time. But this had been different. This hadn't been a mission. There had been no orders, no backup, no justifications. This had been personal. And now it was done. Or at least it should be. The waitress came over, pouring him a coffee without asking. You look like you need it, she muttered. Duke smirked faintly. That obvious? She shrugged. I've seen that look before. Duke raised an eyebrow. Yeah. What look is that? She leaned against the table slightly, meeting his gaze. The kind people have when they've been fighting something for too long. Duke stared at her for a long second. Then he nodded. Maybe she was right. Maybe he had been fighting for too long. But the thing about war? It never really ends. And Duke Callahan wasn't the kind of man who walked away. Duke sat in the diner long after his coffee had gone cold. The sun had fully risen now, casting pale light through the large front windows. The world outside was moving, Trucks rolling down the highway, tired-looking men grabbing breakfast before another long day of work. But inside it felt like time had stopped. Duke stared at his own reflection in the window. For the first time in years he didn't recognize himself. What was he now? He had always been something: a soldier, a husband, a fighter, a man with a mission. But now the mission was over. Lila was gone. She was out there, running, knowing that her life would never be the same. That she would never be safe. And Duke? He was alone. Not in the way he had been before. This wasn't solitude. This was something else. Something darker. He had spent months hunting down his own past, peeling back the layers of betrayal, setting fire to every lie until only the truth remained. But now the fire had burned out. Now there was just the ashes. The waitress passed by again, refilling his cup without asking. She glanced at him, then hesitated. "You sure you're okay?" Duke didn't answer right away. Finally, he exhaled and gave her a small, tired smirk. Never been better. Duke didn't go back to his house. That place wasn't home anymore. Instead, he drove, miles of empty road stretching ahead of him. He didn't have a destination, but he wasn't lost. He was just waiting for something to tell him where to go next. His phone buzzed on the seat beside him. He glanced at the screen. "Nate." Duke picked it up and answered. "Yeah. You still out there?" Nate's voice was steady, the way it always was. Duke smirked. "Aren't I always?" Pause. Then Nate sighed. "You know, you could just stop," he said. "It's over. She's gone. You could start fresh." Duke's fingers flexed against the steering wheel. Start fresh. It sounded nice. Normal. But men like him didn't get fresh starts. Nate seemed to hear his thoughts because his tone shifted. Or, you could use that energy somewhere else. Duke raised an eyebrow. "That's so." "Yeah. I might have something for you." Duke's smirk faded. Nate never wasted words. If he was offering something, it wasn't small. "What kind of something?" Duke asked. Nate hesitated. "The kind that needs a man like you." Duke exhaled slowly. For months he had been chasing one thing: revenge. Now it was gone. But something new was knocking at his door. And he wasn't the kind of man who ignored a knock. "Where do I need to be?" Duke asked. The meeting spot was an abandoned gas station off a back road in New Mexico. Duke pulled up just after sunset, his headlights casting long shadows across the cracked pavement. Nate was already there, leaning against his Jeep, arms crossed. He looked up as Duke stepped out of his truck. "Took you long enough." Duke smirked. "You know I like to make an entrance." Nate shook his head. "You still look like hell." Duke shrugged. "Been a long few months." Nate didn't argue. Instead, he reached into his pocket and tossed Duke a manila envelope. Duke caught it and flipped it open. Inside were photos. Documents. Names. He scanned the pages. Then his eyes narrowed. "You serious?" Duke muttered. Nate's jaw tightened. "Dead serious." Duke closed the folder, his pulse steadier than it had been in a long time. It wasn't over. Not for him. Not yet. Lila was in the wind, and maybe she always would be. But Duke had found something else now. Something worth chasing. Something that needed to be burned down. He looked up at Nate, a small smirk playing at the corner of his lips. "Guess I got some work to do." Duke sat in his truck, the manila folder resting on the dashboard. Outside, the desert wind howled, kicking up dust against the cracked pavement of the abandoned gas station. He hadn't opened the folder again. He didn't need to. The weight of it alone told him everything he needed to know. Nate had handed him something bigger than revenge. A mission. Duke had spent his entire life following orders, serving a purpose. But when the war ended, when his brothers in arms went home, he had been left with nothing. Until now. He ran his fingers over the folder's edge, exhaling slowly. He should walk away. He should take Nate's advice and start fresh. Find some quiet corner of the world and disappear. But that wasn't who he was. He was built for war. And someone out there had just given him a reason to fight again. Duke reached for the folder, flipping it open. The first page held a photo, grainy, black and white, taken from a surveillance camera. A man in a suit. Cold eyes. Scar running down his jawline. Duke's stomach tightened. Beneath the photo was a name. Elliot Mercer. Duke read the name twice. His pulse slowed. Mercer. It had been a long time since Duke had heard that name. A long time since he had buried the memories that came with it. But now the past was back. And Duke Callahan never ignored unfinished business. Nate leaned against the hood of his Jeep, watching Duke's reaction. "You recognize it, don't you?" he asked. Duke's fingers clenched around the folder. Elliot Mercer wasn't just a name. He was a ghost from the past. A name whispered in backroom deals. A man no one dared to cross. Duke had thought he was dead. Apparently he was wrong. "How long's he been back?" Duke asked, his voice flat. Nate exhaled, rubbing a hand over his jaw. 2 years, maybe more. He went underground after the last job went south. But now? He nodded toward the folder. "He's moving again. Bigger. Smarter. Meaner." Duke flipped the page, scanning the documents. Black market deals. Weapons trafficking. Money laundering. Mercer wasn't just another criminal. He was the kind that made people disappear. Duke's jaw tightened. He remembered the last time Mercer's name had crossed his desk. It hadn't ended well. For a moment he let the memories flicker. Gunfire, a mission that had gone sideways, a friend who never made it home. Mercer had been at the center of it. And now he was back. Duke closed the folder. "Where is he?" Nate gave him a long look. "You're really doing this?" Duke's expression didn't change. Mercer had spent years hiding, thinking the world had forgotten. He was wrong. "I need a location," Duke said. Nate exhaled, then reached into his jacket and pulled out a second folder. He tossed it onto the hood of the truck. "There. That's everything we got." Duke grabbed it, flipping it open. An address. Los Angeles. Duke nodded to himself. It wasn't over. Not yet. The road stretched long ahead of him, a highway into the unknown. Duke drove in silence, the city lights of LA glowing faintly in the distance. The weight of the folder sat on the passenger seat, its presence as heavy as the past it carried. Mercer had been a name buried in the sand, a chapter that should have ended years ago. But now it was back. And Duke had never been the kind of man to leave things unfinished. He reached for the radio, switching it on. A low hum of static filled the cabin before an old country song crackled through the speakers. Fitting. He tapped his fingers against the wheel, eyes locked onto the road ahead. He didn't know how this would end. Maybe Mercer was smarter now. Maybe he was more dangerous than before. Maybe this would be the fight Duke didn't walk away from. Didn't matter. Duke Callahan wasn't the kind of man who ran. Not from war. Not from ghosts. And sure as hell not from a name that never should have come back. He pressed harder on the gas. Los Angeles was waiting. And Duke was coming. I hope you all have subscribed by now. And don't forget to leave your lovely and positive comments. Let me know how you found the story and which part you liked the most. Looking forward to your feedback. Duke's truck rolled into Los Angeles just after midnight. The city was alive, buzzing with neon lights and the hum of late-night traffic. Skyscrapers stretched high, casting long shadows over the streets below. It was different from the war zones he was used to. But a battlefield was a battlefield. And LA? It was just another place filled with people who thought they were untouchable. Duke pulled into a parking garage near the outskirts of downtown. He killed the engine, leaning back in his seat, fingers drumming against the steering wheel. He had spent years chasing ghosts, watching men like Mercer crawl into the shadows the second things got too hot. But Mercer had made a mistake. He came back. Duke reached for the folder Nate had given him, flipping it open. The latest intel said Mercer was operating out of an upscale club in West Hollywood, a front for high-end money laundering, drug deals, and quiet assassinations. The kind of place where men whispered secrets over expensive whiskey. Duke smirked. They'd never see him coming. He tossed the folder onto the seat, grabbed his pistol from the glove compartment and stepped out into the night. Los Angeles was waiting. And Duke was ready to burn it down. The club was called Vortex. A high-end, exclusive lounge built for the city's elite. Politicians, businessmen, men with too much power and too little morality. Duke walked in like he belonged. His clothes were simple. Dark jeans, a fitted jacket, boots that made no sound against the marble floors. Nothing flashy. Nothing that drew attention. But the second he stepped inside, he owned the room. His presence was different from the others, sharper, quieter. The kind of energy that made people second-guess themselves. He made his way toward the bar, scanning the crowd. No sign of Mercer. But he wasn't expecting to see him out in the open. Men like Mercer didn't sit in public. They hid in back rooms, surrounded by security, making deals that decided who lived and who disappeared. Duke turned his attention to the bartender. A young guy, maybe mid-20s, with slicked back hair and the kind of forced smile that came from serving rich men who thought they were untouchable. Duke leaned forward, placing $100 bill on the counter. "Looking for someone?" he said, voice low. The bartender raised an eyebrow. "Yeah. And who might that be?" Duke slid the bill closer. "Elliot Mercer." The bartender's smile faded. He hesitated, his fingers twitching slightly against the glass he was cleaning. "Bingo." Duke smirked. "So, you do know him?" The bartender swallowed. "Look, man, that's not a name you just throw around in here." Duke leaned in. "I'm not just throwing it around. I need to see him." The bartender shook his head. "Mercer doesn't do drop-ins. If you don't have a meeting, you're wasting your time." Duke exhaled slowly. He wasn't going to ask twice. Instead, he reached across the bar faster than the kid could react, grabbing him by the wrist and squeezing hard. The bartender let out a choked sound, his eyes going wide. Duke kept his voice calm. Too calm. "I'm gonna give you a choice," he murmured. "You can take me to Mercer, or I can make a mess of this nice little bar." The bartender swallowed hard. Then finally he nodded. Duke let go of his wrist. "Smart choice," he said. The bartender rubbed his hand, still looking pale. "Follow me." Duke didn't hesitate. It was time to meet the man who should have stayed dead. The bartender led Duke through the back halls of the club, past security doors and velvet-lined walls that muffled the sound of the party outside. The deeper they went, the quieter it got. Duke's pulse never changed. He had walked into enemy territory before. The trick was making sure you weren't the one who left in a body bag. The bartender stopped in front of a large oak door. He hesitated, then turned to Duke. "I can't go in there," he muttered. Duke smirked. "Wasn't asking you to." The bartender swallowed hard, then knocked twice. Silence. Then, "Come in." The bartender pushed the door open and stepped aside. Duke didn't hesitate. He walked into the room like he owned the place. Inside, the air smelled like expensive cigars and leather. A fireplace crackled against the far wall, casting flickering shadows across the massive mahogany desk. And behind that desk? Elliot Mercer. The man who was supposed to be dead. Mercer looked up, his sharp eyes locking onto Duke the second he stepped inside. There was no surprise. No shock. Just a slow, knowing smile. Well, Mercer murmured. "Look who finally came looking for me." Duke didn't blink. "Didn't have to look far," he said. "You were dumb enough to crawl out of your hole." Mercer chuckled, tapping the ash off his cigar. "You always did have a mouth on you, Callahan." Duke's jaw clenched. Hearing his name from Mercer's lips made his blood run cold. He took another step forward. "You should have stayed buried," Duke said. Mercer leaned back in his chair, his smirk widening. "And you should have known better than to walk into my den without a leash." Duke felt it before he heard it. The shift in the air. The presence of armed men moving behind him. His muscles coiled. It was a trap. Mercer had been waiting for him. And now, Duke Callahan was officially in the lion's den. Duke didn't turn around. Didn't need to. He could feel them, the presence of at least 4 men shifting behind him, the quiet rustle of holsters, the subtle shift of weight against the wooden floors. Mercer had set the bait and Duke had walked right into it. He should have seen it coming. But it didn't matter. A fight was a fight. And Duke Callahan had never lost one. Mercer took a slow drag from his cigar, watching him. "I have to admit," Mercer said, exhaling a plume of smoke, "I wasn't sure if you'd show up. Thought you might have gotten soft after all these years." Duke smirked. "Funny. I was just thinking the same about you." Mercer chuckled, shaking his head. "Still got that mouth on you." Duke finally moved. Just a step, just enough to shift his weight, to feel the ground beneath his boots. He could hear the way the guards were positioned. One directly behind him. 2 more flanking either side. Another near the door. Mercer leaned back in his chair, eyes sharp. "I know why you're here, Callahan. You think I owe you something." Duke's jaw flexed. Mercer owed him a hell of a lot more than a conversation. "You disappeared," Duke said. "After what you did." Mercer exhaled slowly. "And yet here I am." Duke clenched his fists. "Not for long." Mercer grinned. Then he snapped his fingers. And just like that, the fight was on. The first guard moved fast. Duke moved faster. He ducked just as the man reached for him, grabbing his wrist and twisting it in a brutal motion. Crack. A scream. The gun hit the floor. Duke didn't stop. He pivoted, grabbed the second guard by the lapel and drove his knee into the guy's ribs. The man folded, choking on his breath. Gunfire erupted. Duke spun, using the second guard as a shield. Bullets ripped into the man's back as Duke reached for the fallen weapon. Then, in one smooth motion, he turned and fired. 1 shot. 2 shots. 3. The third guard dropped instantly. The fourth, the one near the door, made a mistake. He hesitated. Duke didn't. He lunged forward, closing the distance in seconds. Before the man could react, Duke had smashed the butt of his stolen gun into his face. Blood sprayed. The man hit the ground. And just like that, it was over. The room was silent again. Except for Mercer's slow, deliberate clapping. Duke turned to face him, breathing steady, body loose. Mercer smirked. That was impressive. Duke didn't answer. Didn't need to. Mercer exhaled, tossing his cigar into the fireplace. Guess you're still the same old Callahan. Duke took a slow step forward. You have no idea who I am anymore. Mercer chuckled. Oh, I think I do. Then he reached for something under his desk. Duke tensed, gripping the gun, ready to fire. But Mercer didn't pull out a weapon. He pulled out a file. And slid it across the desk. Duke didn't move. What is this? Mercer's eyes gleamed. Something that might change your mind about killing me? Duke clenched his jaw. Then, slowly he reached for the file. And opened it. What he saw inside made his blood turn to ice. Duke scanned the documents. The first page was a photo. Black and white. Grainy. A woman. His stomach twisted. Lila. But this wasn't recent. She looked different, younger. Duke's pulse slowed. He flipped to the next page. More photos. More documents. Then, finally, a medical report. He read the words, eyes narrowing. Blood test. Genetic markers. A name he didn't recognize. Then, at the bottom, one sentence that shattered everything. Paternity confirmed. Duke's fingers tightened around the paper. His vision tunneled. Mercer's voice was smooth. You didn't know, did you? Duke's breath hitched. He couldn't move. Couldn't breathe. Mercer leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk. You've been hunting ghosts, Callahan. He smirked. But maybe, you should have been looking closer to home. Duke's entire world shifted. Because there, in black and white, was the truth he had never seen coming. Lila had a child. And according to the file, it was his. Duke thought his war was over. He was wrong. Lila had been hiding something bigger than betrayal. She had been hiding his own blood. Now Duke isn't just chasing revenge. He's chasing answers. Duke stared at the papers in his hands, his mind refusing to process what he was seeing. Lila. A child. His child. He had been chasing revenge. Chasing ghosts. And the whole time, there was something, someone, out there he never knew existed. His breathing slowed, his pulse steady, but inside his world was collapsing. Mercer watched him, amusement flickering in his eyes. I figured you'd want to know, he said, tapping his fingers against the desk. Duke looked up, his jaw tightening. Where is she? Mercer smiled. Now that's the million-dollar question. Duke's grip on the file tightened. If you're lying? Mercer raised a hand lazily. I don't lie, Callahan. You know that. That was the problem. Mercer didn't lie. Which meant everything in this folder was real. Duke exhaled slowly, shoving the papers back into the file. He wasn't going to lose control. Not now. Not until he knew everything. He took a step closer to the desk. Towering. Dominating. If you know where my child is, you tell me. Now. Mercer chuckled. See, that's the thing. I don't have her. Duke's fingers flexed. But I know who does. Mercer leaned forward, his smile fading. And trust me, you're gonna want to hear this. Mercer slid another document across the desk. Duke snatched it up, his eyes scanning the text. One name stood out. Victor Ruiz. Duke's blood ran cold. Victor Ruiz was a high-level trafficker. Not just weapons, people. And if Ruiz had his daughter, Duke exhaled slowly. Controlled. Focused. How long? He asked, his voice deadly calm. Mercer tilted his head. She was taken 6 months ago. Lila owed people money. Ruiz decided she was a better asset as leverage. Duke's pulse pounded. And Lila never tried to get her back? Mercer chuckled. Lila was more interested in saving her own skin. Sound familiar? Duke clenched his jaw. Of course she was. His own flesh and blood had been out there, stolen, used as a bargaining chip, and he never even knew. Mercer leaned back. I'm assuming you're gonna go after her. Duke slid the folder into his jacket. I don't assume, Mercer. Mercer smirked. That's what I like about you, Callahan. Duke turned for the door, but Mercer's voice stopped him. Be careful. Duke paused. Mercer's eyes sharpened. Ruiz isn't a street thug. He runs entire networks. And if he knows you're coming? Duke didn't turn around. He doesn't get to know. Then he walked out. The hunt had begun. Duke had stormed war zones before. Had taken down entire networks, hunted men who thought they were untouchable. This was personal. He parked 3 blocks away from Ruiz's known hideout, an old industrial building by the docks. No markings, no signs, just a fortress where people disappeared. Duke didn't hesitate. He moved through the shadows, every step calculated. He had one goal. One mission. Find his daughter. Get her out. Kill anyone who stood in his way. He reached the back entrance, took a slow breath, then kicked the door in. The first guard didn't even have time to react. Duke grabbed him, slammed his head against the wall, and dragged his unconscious body to the ground. Then he moved. Silent. Deadly. One by one he took them out. Gunfire erupted in the distance, voices shouting, footsteps pounding toward him. Duke didn't stop. He moved through the hallways like a ghost of war, leaving bodies in his wake. Then, he found it. A small, locked room at the end of the hall. He pressed his ear against the door. A soft sound. A whimper. His stomach tightened. He kicked the door open. Inside, in the dim light, a little girl. Curled up in the corner, eyes wide with fear. Duke's breath caught. She looked just like him. And in that moment, something inside him shifted. Everything else, the war, the revenge, the ghosts, none of it mattered anymore. He had found her. And he was never letting her go. Duke's eyes locked onto the small figure curled up in the corner of the dimly lit room. His daughter. His blood. She was no more than 5 years old, her dark hair messy, her tiny frame trembling. She was terrified. The second the door had crashed open, she had flinched, conditioned to fear anyone who walked through it. Duke's chest tightened. His fists clenched at his sides. Who the hell had put that fear in her? Who had made his own child flinch at the sight of someone coming to save her? A storm raged inside him. But his voice when he spoke was calm. Steady. Safe. Hey, sweetheart. She didn't move. Didn't breathe. Duke crouched lower, keeping his hands visible, his presence non-threatening. I'm gonna take you home now, he said softly. You don't have to be scared. Her tiny lip trembled. She looked at him, really looked at him. And something passed between them. Recognition? No. She didn't know who he was. Not yet. But trust? Maybe just enough. Duke extended his hand. Come on, kiddo. Let's get you out of here. She hesitated. Then slowly, so slowly, she reached for him. And the second her little fingers touched his hand, something inside Duke broke. This wasn't just revenge anymore. This was redemption. But before he could say another word, a gunshot exploded from the hallway. Duke spun, shielding her with his body. Footsteps pounded toward them. More men. More guns. They weren't out yet. And Duke Callahan wasn't leaving without a fight. The first man through the door didn't even have time to react. Duke fired once, twice, sending him crashing to the ground before he could aim his weapon. The second one tried to flank left. Duke grabbed him, slammed him against the wall, and snapped his wrist backward. A scream. A gun falling to the floor. Duke kicked it away and took him out with a single shot. More footsteps. Duke's eyes flickered to his daughter. She was frozen in the corner, her little hands clenched into fists. No. She had already been through too much. Duke grabbed her, lifting her effortlessly into his arms. She stiffened at first, not used to being held. Duke's grip tightened. Close your eyes, baby, he murmured. I got you. She did. And Duke Callahan became a force of nature. Every bullet was precise. Every movement was calculated. He moved like a man with nothing left to lose, except her. By the time the last body hit the floor, the building was silent. The air was thick with the stench of gunpowder and blood. But Duke? He didn't feel a damn thing. He turned, carrying his daughter out of the hell she had been trapped in. She clung to him now, tight, trusting. And Duke knew. For the first time in his life, he wasn't just fighting to end something. He was fighting to start something new. For her. For them. For whatever came next. And as he stepped out into the night, into the fresh air, with the weight of war finally lifted off his shoulders, she whispered something against his chest. A single quiet word. Dad. Duke's breath hitched. His arms tightened around her. And for the first time in a long, long time, Duke Callahan felt like he had something to live for. But before you go, where are you watching from? Eyes drop your country in the comments. And if you made it this far, hit that like button. Not for me but for Duke. Because that man went through hell and back. And if you want more, subscribe so you don't miss the next thriller that'll keep you on the edge of your seat. Till then, stay sharp, stay safe, and I'll see you in the next one. The end.